Gonna- And tonight we have Dr. Deborah Reed presenting on the dyslexia specialist endorsement for Iowa. And I am in the first cohort and I just feel so grateful that I got accepted. It's been an amazing experience so far and we've only had one semester. So just to respect everybody's time, I'm going to let Dr. Reed take over and get started. And I know she'll mention this too, but just feel free to jump in with questions anytime.
Thank you, Amy. Happy to be here and happy to be talking about this brand new endorsement. This is the first, right now, Amy is in the first ever cohort in Iowa because the program was just launched and currently is exclusive to the University of Iowa, but it won't be forever. We'll talk a little bit about that this evening. So basically what I want to do to get us started is to talk about the origins of this new endorsement and why it is created the way it is created, just to give everybody a little bit of background. So the image that you see on the screen now came from the Dyslexia Task Force report, which came out in the fall of 2019 and was really more widely distributed in spring of 2020 amidst COVID, of course, and everything that was going on with that, along with an appeal to the legislature to add this endorsement. And this image originally conceptualized the different levels of knowledge about dyslexia that the task force felt educators and those involved in the education of children would have depending on their specific role within the system. So starting at that base purple level 1 would be pretty much anyone and everyone who interacts with children in an educational setting should have some basic information about dyslexia. And that's the kind of information that can be accomplished in the dyslexia overview module that the Iowa Reading Research Center has hosted online for several years now. But that overview module has typically been for pre-service educators because in 2016, legislation was passed requiring all pre-service educators to have some exposure to dyslexia as part of their teacher preparation. So since that time, we've been hosting this overview module, although we originally hosted a third-party module until we developed our own and launched our own in 2019. But now, under Senate File 2356, which also created the Dyslexia Specialist Endorsement, all in-service educators will be required to complete that dyslexia overview module by June 30th of 2024. So that purple layer 1, which is pretty much anyone and everyone, and involves that dyslexia overview module, is accomplished by completing that module, which only requires about 45 minutes, and you get a little certificate of it. But that's the base level of knowledge. And things increase as you go up, and each successive level kind of subsumes the layers below it so that you're not excused from the overview module, for example, if you're going for a dyslexia specialist endorsement. Although there were these separate layers of 3 and 4, essentially the dyslexia specialist endorsement combines a little bit these layers 3 and 4. And leaves layer 5 as a top layer that would require a full master's degree. Layers 3 and 4 ended up being this kind of combination because of where the dyslexia specialist endorsement falls within the teacher licensure system. It requires that you already have a teaching certificate. And so you may have already done the reading endorsement, which does not satisfy any requirements for the dyslexia specialist endorsement. But the dyslexia specialist endorsement doesn't involve a full-fledged master's. So it's falling in between those two spaces of the reading endorsement being a lower level of knowledge and the master's degree being a higher level of knowledge. So the dyslexia specialist endorsement falls in between there, if that makes sense. So it is sort of a graduate level. Well, it is a graduate level but it doesn't give you a graduate degree, which is why it's this semi-combination of 3 and 4. Is that okay with everyone? Do we have any questions about that? So then we had to figure out how to make this work. And it seemed most logical to make the dyslexia specialist endorsement a pathway to the reading specialist certificate, since it was in that in-between stage and requires a good number of credit hours. We wanted those credit hours ultimately to be able to be applied towards a master's degree and not just accomplished and get your endorsement and that's done. And then you have to start all over again to get a master's. So when we wrote the rules, we took that into consideration. And what you see on the left-hand side of the screen, I'm gonna get my little laser pointer here, just a second. What you see over here on this side of the screen are the rules that we wrote at the Iowa Reading Research Center for the dyslexia specialist endorsement. And what you see on the right-hand side of the screen were the existing rules for the reading specialist certificate. And where you see purple font, such as this font right here, you will notice that that is borrowed language from the reading specialist certificate. So the applicant must have the requirements for the standard. The applicant must have met the requirements for the standard license. So you can see that we pulled that purple text, we pulled into different places of the dyslexia specialist endorsement. Where you see red text, you'll notice that the red text is only present on your left-hand side of your screen. And that is because it is completely unique to the dyslexia specialist endorsement. So there are things required for this endorsement that would never be satisfied by the reading specialist certificate alone. Where you see yellow highlight over here on the left-hand side of the screen, that indicates that the language matches language that appeared in the Dyslexia Task Force report. So we were trying to comply with the task force report while also creating this pathway to the reading specialist certificate. On the right-hand side of the screen, you see turquoise font, which you do not see on the left-hand side of the screen. And that is because those bits of the reading specialist certificate rules are unique just to that certificate. So you would never satisfy them by getting the dyslexia specialist endorsement. And that's fine because you're going to satisfy some things, but you'll have additional credit hours that you have to complete in order to finish your master's degree and get the dyslexia specialist certificate. So it will have some degree of overlap, but one will not satisfy the other. Does that make sense? This is just a sampling of the rules. It's not the complete rules for either one of those. Okay, so what we ended up with for the endorsement was a post-baccalaureate program, meaning you already have to have completed your initial licensure and you have to have 3 years of certified teaching experience. It will complete 18 graduate level credit hours that could be applied to your master's degree. The master's degree typically requires between 32 and 36 credit hours, depending on the institution's program. So you'll get about halfway through the master's program by working on the dyslexia specialist endorsement, or ideally, at least that's how we conceived of it, but we'll talk about some of the issues that have risen since then. You have to complete 2 different kinds of practicum experiences as part of the dyslexia specialist endorsement. One is purely involving assessment, and this is standardized assessments for learning how to identify children with the characteristics of dyslexia. And the other practicum, also a semester-long practicum, is then on delivering intervention to children who have characteristics of dyslexia. So 2 separate semester-long practicum experiences, each worth 3 credit hours. And I point that out because in a little bit, we'll distinguish our program from programs at other institutions in other states so that you can see the differences between what we are offering and what they have. And so that's the basis of the comparison I'm going to do now, which is both in terms of the credit hours of our program, the type of experiences that you have, and the degree of the instructor and peer interaction. And that last one is because most of the dyslexia type certificates or endorsements at other institutions in other states are fully online and fully asynchronous. And we just don't think that that is enough of a quality experience to prepare you for working with families and children and interacting with other educators around this issue. This is a very political environment. It's very emotionally charged because families with children with dyslexia are very frustrated, very scared for their children. They see the anguish that their kids go through every day and see all the tears at night. And so you need to have some good guided experiences in learning how to navigate these scenarios, both with your colleagues and with the families and children that you'll be interacting. So we are committed to not allowing this to be a fully asynchronous program. And at least at the University of Iowa, with the program that I oversee, it will not be. We do have a hybrid program. We meet synchronously once a week, and then once a month, we meet in person, face-to-face in Des Moines. When we compare our program to other programs, because we did look at other programs just to get some guidance and to make some decisions about what we wanted to do, one of the more popular programs right now is Fitchburg State Universities. But what I want to point out about this program is that it prepares you for Wilson. And the majority of the credits, if you look at this, this is 18 credit hours. That's our full program is 18 credit hours. 18 credit hours is just on Wilson certification. There is nothing wrong with Wilson. I like Wilson. It's one of the most well-known programs for children with dyslexia. However, it is one program that is available. And we don't want our graduates to be just trained by a vendor to deliver one program. We want our graduates to be well-versed in dyslexia, to really understand the whys, wherefores of how this program was created and how it serves children with dyslexia. And depending on the school where you work, they may not have purchased Wilson. And you're not in a position to go in and dictate to them that they need to get Wilson because that's all you've been prepared to deliver. You may have to work with whatever program they currently have or want to get. And so we want our graduates to have more flexibility and the knowledge to be able to adapt to different materials. You should know what to do without being dependent on an existing set of materials in order to do it. So that's why we didn't want to be like this program. Then let's compare to another program. My colleagues at the University of Florida, I know them, I've worked with them. I was at Florida State University and Florida Center for Reading Research before coming here. And I still to this day work with colleagues at University of Florida. I respect them greatly. Meeting their state requirements, they've compiled a program that is fewer credit hours. If you'll notice, their total credit hours are only 15, not 18. So our state requirement for an endorsement is 18 credit hours. So that's just a difference in the states, not necessarily in the quality of what they're offering. The other thing is that the University of Florida program is 100% online asynchronous. Ours is not. And they do not have two separate semester-long practicum experiences. They have one course that combines assessment and intervention. So you get half of the experience with assessment and half of the experience with intervention if you complete the University of Florida program versus our program. And that's the main difference between the 15 and the 18 credit hours between our two programs. The final one that I'll compare to is Mount St. Joseph's program, which has a dyslexia certificate, and I believe it's embedded within a Science of Reading Master's, which is a great idea, and I wish we could do that here. The dyslexia certificate, as you'll notice, is a total of 21 credit hours, so it's actually one course longer than our program in Iowa. And the first set of credit hours, the first 15 credit hours, make up what they're calling as the reading core courses. And those classes include psychology of reading, phonics and linguistics, diagnosis, etc. All of these that you see here. They do mention Orton-Gillingham practice. I don't know enough about this program to know about this certificate program in order to know if that is a particular curriculum or not, because most dyslexia programs are OG based, Orton-Gillingham based. So it could be generalized, but it also could be a very specific set of materials. So that would be one consideration to have. The other is the difference in the practicum experiences that are offered. Their practicum experiences are involving more intervention, so less on the assessment end and more on the intervention end. I would also say, and Amy can probably concur, getting 18 credit hours in is a lot when you're a full-time professional. And so contemplating adding even one more course is a big consideration. And so we're falling in between a state that has 15 credit hours and another state that has 21 credit hours. So we're kind of in the middle. And even at that, it takes a full year and a half, including a summer course, in order to get in all of the 18 credit hours when you're a full-time working professional. So I don't know, Amy, if you want to say anything about that.
Sure. I will say, like, it's rigorous and it's a lot. But if you time management it out, right, it can be done for sure. There's a whole cohort of people who have families and full-time jobs, and it's been tough, but we are getting through it, and it's worth every single second of it. But I was kind of used before this. I hadn't taken a lot of classes because I had kind of maxed out on my pay scale. And I would take courses just for interest. But it's a lot different than just taking like a Heartland AEA course for sure. And even compared to my reading specialist endorsement and things like that, it's a huge jump, but it's worth it.
Well, I'm glad you feel that, Amy. And I see there was a question that came in on the chat. Does this mean that the dyslexia specialist preparation already completed outside of Iowa will not be recognized? That is not necessarily the case. There are rule changes going through right now because of concerns that were raised about these differences in outside programs versus what Iowa is requiring through their rules. And the legislators didn't want to incentivize going to out-of-state programs that would be somewhat easier to complete, if you will, and not fully satisfy the rules. And really, Decoding Dyslexia Iowa, and I would say I agree with Decoding Dyslexia Iowa, we were really concerned about preserving the integrity of the dyslexia specialist endorsement and the intent that we had as a task force in creating this and advocating for it with the legislature. So the rules are going to be tightened up a little bit. It is possible to complete an out-of-state program and still transfer your certificate to Iowa. You may be asked to do an additional practicum, for example, or you may be asked to take an additional course. If your entire program was based on Wilson certification, the language that is being put through to revise the rules right now will disallow that. It's going to tighten that up so that you cannot be prepared in a single curriculum in order to get the certificate. So it is possible, but it's no guarantee that any program, anyone at all, would satisfy the requirements for Iowa. They will have to be reviewed and approved. If you already have a master's, are there fewer classes that you would take? No, not in our program, because our program is a cohort based and because the nature of the courses is different. So if this question actually comes up quite a lot because we borrowed classes in language from the current reading specialist, and at Iowa it's called a developmental reading master's. But the focus of our coursework is so different that we actually added dyslexia to the end of our course name to distinguish it from the classes that are strictly for the reading specialist certificate. I can give you one big contrast because I got the syllabi for the reading specialist certificate and they teach the 3 cueing systems. we would not teach that in the dyslexia specialist endorsement. So if the coursework is different in that way, then it's tough to accept credit or to distinguish who gets credit and who doesn't. And the other thing that perhaps Amy might comment on later is that using this cohort model, we've really built and sequenced and integrated the classes in such a way that it would be hard to not be participating in one and still understand what's going on in another. I see her nodding, so thank you for that, Amy. So it just doesn't seem to work well for our program. I can't speak to what other universities might propose in the future. With those requirements in place, we did set out applications. It took a while to get everything through last year because we had to write the rules. We had to get the rules approved by the Board of Educational Examiners. They had to be approved by the Administrative Rules Committee of the state legislature and go back and forth and have open comment period, et cetera. And so everything finally passed in, I believe, April, and we had to get our program approved by the Department of Education. So it was a very short turnaround to accept applicants, and we closed applications in May, which was very late for decisions, but we did have decisions out at the end. We initially had targeted that 20 to 25 is where we thought the first cohort would be in terms of size, but given the interest, we raised the cap to 30 because it seemed like there was a strong interest in the endorsement. We received 28 applicants, so we were within the 30 cap. However, 2 of the applications were incomplete, so it really is important to pay attention to the requirements for the applications. 2 of the applicants were ineligible because they did not have 3 years of certified teaching experience. So that is really scrutinized. And 2 of the applicants were not aligned with the intent of this first cohort for the endorsement, which is to say they were instructors at other institutes of higher education who just wanted to learn about our program so that potentially they could turn around and offer it at their institutions. And the legislature had asked us to prioritize getting boots on the ground in classrooms, working with kids and teachers. And so we were not going to accept other instructors from institutes of higher education in this initial cohort. That's not to say that they will never be accepted, but our first priority as given to us by the legislature was to prepare people who were working directly with kids and families and teachers. All 9 of the AEAs are represented in some way, but 8 of the 9 AEAs have designated a dyslexia specialist for their agency. And so those 8 people were submitted as applicants, and the 8 met all the requirements and are a part of the cohort. There is the 9th AEA is represented, but the person is not in the designated role at this time for the AEA. We also have representation of all grade levels, and for a short while we had representation of private schools as well as public schools, but as you'll see in just a moment, we did lose our private school representative. We admitted 22 people after we removed the 6 applicants who, for various reasons, could not be accepted. We enrolled 21 because before the actual enrollments, one person could not secure funding to manage the program. It is costly, so that is understandable. So someone dropped. And then after the cohort got started, there was a member of the cohort whose family had a medical emergency, and that individual had to drop. So we're right back where we started, which we thought the initial cohort would be between 20 and 25 students, and we have exactly 20 students in the first cohort. So they're a very strong group and have a really high capacity, so it's been a lot of fun working with them. The timeline for their coursework, as we said, it's pretty intense if you're a full-time working professional, which every single member of the cohort is, but you can see that there is not a break in this. There are 2 courses in the fall. There is 1 course and the first practicum that then occurs in the spring. There is a course over the summer even, and then the final practicum is in the fall. And the first cohort will graduate December of 2022, or I guess they don't actually graduate because it's not a degree conferring program, but they will be eligible to get their certificates in December of 2022. In the meantime, however, we will be enrolling a new cohort in fall of 2022. So I'll explain a little bit about the applications in a moment. The practicum experiences that the cohort members have to have are both in assessment and in instruction, as I indicated. We are trying to work around schedules when people are teaching full-time, or if there are AEA representatives who have to travel around and visit to different schools. It can be challenging to work in the practicum hours that are required, and they cannot coincide with your regular teaching duties. So if you're already a reading intervention teacher, you can't just say, well, I teach these kids every day for reading intervention, and I'm just going to count that as my intervention practicum. That's not allowable. It has to be outside of your typical teaching duties or your typical responsibilities within the schools where you work. So that means that you have to do it before school, you have to do it after school, you have to do it on a preparation period, you have to do it over lunch or some other time that would not overlap with your existing responsibilities. So it can be a grueling day for you, and a little negotiation has to happen. In addition, because it is a multi-grade endorsement, you have to have both elementary time and you have to have high school time. We have to hit both ends of the spectrum. So if you're currently based in an elementary school, it's easier, I should say, to work out how you're going to fulfill your practicum requirements within your building. But you also have to do half of your time at a high school. So you have to figure out how you're going to get to a high school kid at some other time in order to complete the requirements. So we're working with all of the districts and schools and cohort members to figure that out, and we'll have a lot more information about what that means and what that takes after the first round this spring. But it has been eye-opening with a couple of districts thinking that because of the assessment part of the assessment practicum, that it must be research. Because it doesn't look like the typical placements that they have of student teachers or other people completing a practicum. So in 2 districts, we were actually rebuffed at first because they said, no, this is research and you'd have to fill out our research forms. And we had to explain to them, nope, not research. This is part of fulfilling the rules for this brand new endorsement, and try to work with them on figuring out what that meant. And also what the requirements would be of a cooperating teacher, because currently nobody has this dyslexia specialist endorsement. So how do you assign a mentor who's probably going to know less than the person that they're overseeing for this experience? So we're doing a lot of negotiation to try and figure that out with everyone. The final piece that a lot of people on the dyslexia board are asking about now is how are we going to hold people who complete a program accountable, especially as programs are offered by additional institutions. They have to be approved initially by the Iowa Reading Research Center, but once they're up and running, if they change their curriculum in some way, we wouldn't necessarily know. They could look good on paper, in other words, but what they're actually carrying out in the coursework and in the practicum might be very different. So is there anything that for the long term we can do to ensure that everyone sticks to the intent? Well, the Department of Education already has some oversight. We have looked at other things like an exam. It's not uncommon to have to take an exam to complete an endorsement or an additional certificate. The only existing exam we could require people to take would be the K-PURI through the International Dyslexia Association. It does have a cost, but most exams have a cost. So I don't necessarily think that $165 is out of the range of a certification exam. However, this is a vendor. The International Dyslexia Association has become its own sort of commercial entity, offering its own coursework, trademarking the term structured literacy. And so it gets a little dicey when they're tightening the rules to say you can't complete somebody else's master's program that's on a specific curriculum but you have to pass a test that's from a different vendor and based on their requirements and their pay. So I'm not sure how this is going to be worked out, but at this time, there is no certification exam requirement. The other difficulty with CAPIRI is that to maintain your certification through the International Dyslexia Association, you have to complete additional credit hours from their approved list. So again, much more like a commercial vendor than the way Iowa treats it. So that puts it in that realm of we're not really sure where this falls. We are preparing our cohort members to be successful on the CAPIRI. I would encourage them, if they're interested in it, to go ahead and take the exam once they finish their coursework with us. But we're not requiring it. And the state is, as of this time, not requiring it as well. Although as I said, it's something people are continuing to look at just to ensure the long-term integrity of what's intended. So other issues to consider moving forward, I think the financial burden of completing the endorsement is a major barrier for a lot of people who would like to get it and people that we would want to have get it. So that there are more people out there in schools and working with kids. There are no grants and no scholarships and no forms of financial support currently offered by the state in order to complete this endorsement. I mention that because there is financial support from the state for other types of programs like school psychologists. There is financial support offered from the state. So I don't think it's prohibited that the state would support it, but there's no plan that I am aware of at this time to offer some sort of similar funding to encourage people to complete this endorsement. The question that already came up about if you've completed some coursework, will that count towards this? It's a problem that, as I mentioned, because we share course numbers and names, but the content of our courses is so different that we've had to so designate them at the University of Iowa to distinguish what you've learned basically by that. I do see a question here about if you already have a master or no. Is the dyslexia consultant endorsement available in Iowa at this time? Yes, it is. Currently, it's only available through the University of Iowa. But again, as soon as this cohort finishes in December of 2022, other institutes of higher education in Iowa will be able to apply to offer the dyslexia specialist endorsement. So it will widen to other institutions probably in January of 2023 or soon thereafter. The transfer of the endorsement or credits from other institutions is something that, as I mentioned earlier, is already in the process of rule change through the Board of Educational Examiners and the Administrative Rules Committee. It has been heard by the Board of Educational Examiners. The revised language has gone forward. I think it is going back to the Administrative Rules Committee in January. They're very slight tweaks. Again, it's to tighten it up so that it can't be based on a single curriculum and that an out-of-state transfer of your credential would require IRC approval just as an initial as an initial endorsement program would also require IRC approval. So it's just to align it. And the final issue that is left out there is whether or not positions will become available in districts. The biggest incentive for people to go through an endorsement program is because they want to get a certain job. And if those jobs don't exist, then you'd have to question, why would I spend all this money and get this endorsement when it's not going to change anything that I'm doing currently? I think that the group that we have is really passionate and wanted some additional learning and wanted these experiences. But I think to make this larger scale, it's going to take schools and districts demonstrating a commitment to better serving children with characteristics of dyslexia by creating special positions just for people with these qualifications. We hope that that happens. It is happening at the area education agencies, so that's encouraging, but we need to see this in a larger scale through schools and districts. I know that Ottumwa has created a position, so that's one district, and that's a great start, but we have many, many other districts in Iowa, and we would like to see more positions created. So in the meantime, if you're passionate like our current cohort members are and want this additional learning, what does it mean that you can do? Well, of course, you can provide support to your colleagues in your building, letting them know more about dyslexia and helping them with addressing the needs of the children in their classes who have dyslexia. So you may be providing intervention in one setting, but these kids are also interacting with other educators in other settings, and you can provide advice for helping the kids be successful throughout their day and throughout multiple school years. Possibly, you could help with identifying children with characteristics of dyslexia. We say possibly because, as you know, Iowa is a non-categorical state. You are allowed to say dyslexia. That has been passed into legislation. But we don't really have an official identification process for the state or a mechanism for identifying kids with dyslexia within school systems yet. I know that the Dyslexia Board is interested in discussing this further, and Decoding Dyslexia Iowa has asked the state for guidance, for them to put out guidance, in other words, that AEAs and school districts can follow. And should that guidance come, then I think there will be a strong role for dyslexia specialists. But it really is up to the state to generate the guidance. That's the way state departments of education function, and that's what we have to do, is follow that guidance. Dyslexia specialists can advise on interventions. Kids get reading interventions every day. And so some kids are going to have characteristics of dyslexia, and you can certainly provide advice on what are appropriate interventions for them, what are steps to take in intensifying interventions, and what are the things that can be done in a supplemental setting, as well as in the tier 1 or gen ed setting to complement what happens in interventions. And a dyslexia specialist could deliver the interventions himself or herself. So you can be a reading interventionist. You might advise others on what they do, or you might do it yourself, in other words. So those are things we know, that 3 of the things at least that we know that dyslexia specialists can do now. And the 4th, with potentially identifying students with characteristics of dyslexia, may or may not come to fruition. But I think that the information that you learn to gather on these students can certainly inform what happens in interventions, whether or not there is ever an official process in the state for identifying kids. So what are we still waiting for in terms of this guidance besides the identification process? That's number 1 is, will there ever be an official diagnostic process that removes it from health professionals, because this is not a medical condition, it is an educational condition. And so it is my belief as a professional and as an expert in this area that the identification process belongs with schools and with educational professionals, not with healthcare professionals. So I would love to see an official diagnostic process that can occur in school systems. It is the only way to ensure that families without means and money can fairly get their children identified and get appropriate services. If you have to get to a private provider or to the University of Iowa hospital and wait on a 6-month waiting list, then you're probably not poor. So you're probably a family that has some money and some means to get additional services for your child. And so that's unfortunate for families without such resources. We would like to see some additional consistency in the curricula that are offered to children who are identified with characteristics of dyslexia, but we would also like to see consistency in the curricula for the dyslexia specialist endorsement. We don't know what that's going to look like when additional institutions are offering the endorsement program. So it may be that people are pretty well aligned from institute to institute. but we don't know. So it's something to keep an eye on, and something that I hope that the Dyslexia Board will attend to as well. Especially if there's no accountability mechanism for issuing the endorsement at the end of the program. And finally, what we've already talked about is the incentives for positions within schools and districts to ensure that there's value in people completing the program, even at the expense that it is, and value to the schools and to the families that they serve. The final really difficult issue is where we began, which was that this was to be a pathway to the reading specialist certificate, which means that you've only completed about half of the coursework and requirements for the master's, and you would like to continue on at the same institution and complete your master's. I can tell you currently at the University of Iowa, that pathway is not complete. Because the focus of our coursework is so different, just as I said, I cannot accept credit for the same title of class that is done outside of the endorsement program, because the content of that class is diametrically opposed to what we prepare our cohort members to do. The reverse is also true. The instructors of the Dyslexia Specialist program will not accept the coursework done for the Dyslexia Specialist endorsement. So we remain at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how we believe that children develop reading ability and what best practices in literacy instruction look like and are and should be as delivered in schools. And until there's a bridge made between these polar opposites, that pathway that we intended for the Dyslexia Specialist endorsement to the Reading Specialist certificate will not be completed. We also hope that it pushes down into the reading endorsement as well, because right now we have a really high capacity cohort, and that's because they've done a lot of their own self-study. Not because they came in saying, I learned all of this when I was in my teacher prep program and I completed my reading endorsement. Most of them come in and say, I didn't learn any of this. I've been doing some of my own professional development and my own professional reading, and that's why I know this, and I'm ready for more. And so we would like to see the influence to not only extend up into the reading specialist certificate, but also down into the reading endorsement and the pre-service preparation. So the question is, it sounds like you're also in the middle of the reading wars. I am very much in the middle of the reading wars. I got yelled at by a colleague for taking their course numbers and titles. So yes, deeply entrenched, unfortunately. Sorry to say, but right there with you, Michelle, in some way. So we'd like to see it extend, as I said, in both directions and influence the preparation of reading endorsement candidates as well as reading specialist candidates. But I was asked by our IRRC Advisory Council to explore who's even offering the reading specialist certificate anymore, because people couldn't quite come up with all of these institutions. I think there are something like 30 teacher prep institutions in the state, but only 5 of them offer the reading specialist certificate right now. These are the 5 that currently offer reading specialist, which involves, as I said, the master's degree. And across all 5 institutions, there were only 13 total graduates last year. So you can see that our dyslexia specialist endorsement already exceeds the output of the reading specialist certificate, and we're in only 1 institution, and this is across 5. Our cohort has 20 members. So next December, a year from now, we're going to be graduating 20. In the entire year, last year, across 5 institutions, only 13 people graduated with the reading specialist certificate. So in my mind, this program is no longer in demand. The reading specialist program is no longer in demand, and it may be, I have no data to support this per se, but it may be because a lot of people don't perceive it as providing the kinds of information that they're seeking if they're trying to advance their knowledge by obtaining this master's degree. So I think there's a larger question to answer here about how we complete this pathway and what it really means to be a reading specialist, and what we think as a state this pathway really should be, from reading endorsement to dyslexia specialist to reading specialist. And how does it align with that triangle I was showing you, where the pinnacle of the triangle should be the reading specialist with the master's degree. But right now, the theoretical orientation is so different that it's impossible for that to occur in that way. So I think there are grander conversations to have. And I hope we're all prepared for them, because I think they're going to be challenging. So if you're interested in additional information about the endorsement, I put this up here as a QR code to get to our webpage, which is a screenshot that you see here. We do have, and this scrolls, this is just what I could get in the little snippet here, but it scrolls down. We do try to keep a running tabulation of frequently asked questions to provide you information, so you don't have to email us and get the same response. So you can scroll down and see lots of the questions and other information. This green button here is a direct link to the information from the University of Iowa for applying for the dyslexia specialist endorsement. So I'm going to give you a moment in case you need to capture that QR code, because then I'm going to advance and show you the application page. And while you're doing that, I'm going to read the chat box here. It says, considering the current reality in Iowa, where does this leave someone who has already completed a master's as a dyslexia specialist? Feels as if that work is being dismissed simply because, oh no, not at all. That's a really good question, Liz. So if you completed a master's as a dyslexia specialist, you absolutely should apply to the Board of Educational Examiners. You absolutely should. In fact, I've been contacted by several people who are within 1 or 2 classes of finishing their endorsement or certificate in another institution in another state. And they've asked me, should I stop and restart with the University of Iowa? And I have told every one of them, absolutely not. Finish your endorsement or certificate wherever you are, apply to the Board of Educational Examiners like anyone else would who's trying to transfer their certificate or endorsement to Iowa. And then they will tell you, do you just need another practicum? Do you just need to take this one class? Whatever it is, it will be minimal, if anything. You may not have to do anything at all.
Well, that's the thing. I got the dyslexia specialist endorsement, and I have the master's as a dyslexia specialist, but that's why I was asking it when I look at that tier and point number 5 of the dyslexia consultant, if I've already completed the master's in that strand, but I haven't seen the dyslexia consultant endorsement available at the state level. Am I correct in that?
That's correct. It does not exist at this time. Our hope is that it becomes synonymous with reading specialist. That was kind of where we were going with the pathway. But right now, it can't be completed in that way, unless you've done it out of state as you have.
Right. And I guess that's probably another question that I can just email you, because I just inquired about the reading specialist and how my current reality aligns with that. And I'm being told I would have to do a 5th reading practicum. And I'm like, that's just crazy to say. If I already have the master's as a dyslexia specialist, that doesn't align. I feel like I'm being asked to jump through a hoop. And I don't think that's what the state wants, but that's what they're requiring.
Yeah, and every institution, well, so if you're not going through an institution, if you're applying directly to the Board of Educational Examiners, they make their decisions based on the rules that they have to operate on. So I know that they line up what you completed with what their rules are, and they try to look for a match. My experience with them has been, for the most part, that they try to be generous and grant credit. But I have a doctoral student, for example, who did her master's in special education, and she completed all of her certificates for being a special educator. When she moved to Iowa, she tried to transfer her teaching certificate, and they made her retake 3 courses, which were totally ridiculous. I mean, they were repeats of things she already had. She had a master's degree. I mean, everything was fine. But you're right. At some point, it's just, you got to jump through the hoops, check the boxes and say, okay, I'm good, and transfer your certificate. So I don't think it's something that is unique to what's happening with either reading specialist or dyslexia endorsement. I think it's just the way it works with going from state to state and transferring credentials. But does it have to be through the University of Iowa? No, absolutely it does not. And it sounds like you have additional preparation that situates you well for serving children and families and other teachers, which is what we want. And so hopefully whatever hoops they would make you jump through would be minimal.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know what the 5th practicum would be, but
what you're saying is not what I heard from the Board of Educational Examiners this week. And so that's, as an educator, I find that problematic that we're hearing from a premier person with really reading and the Iowa Reading Research Center within our state, but yet what you're saying isn't aligning with what the Board of Educational Examiners said the same week. So I find that very concerning.
Well, I'm not sure what they looked at or what their response was. So I'm reluctant to say that we don't agree, because I don't know what they saw or what their comments were. So I'm going only off of what you said, but
right. And I understand that. So I think that's a personal email at a later date.
Yeah, we can certainly look into that further. And it could also be, Liz, because they know these rule changes are pending. They may be stalling a little bit or hedging their bets a little bit. So yeah, I'm happy to talk with you further about that. See if there's anything I can do to help out. So, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and advance. I have a new QR code for you on this page if you want to capture that. It will take you directly to the application information for the University of Iowa. We originally, you'll notice it says on here that for the admit into fall of 2021, the application due date was May 15th of 2021. That was last year. And that was because it took so long to get the rules and everything through and get the program approved that we were just delayed in being able to even open applications. That is not the case. Applications open immediately after the last round closed. So our applications are now due February 1st. So our session tonight is quite timely because this due date will come up very quickly after the holidays, and we have to have everything in and close those applications in February. We want to be able to notify people in March because it does take additional time to work this out for your finances and for your schedules and things like that. So not finding out until May is a tough situation to be in when you have to do a lot of other manipulations for funding and scheduling, et cetera. So are we okay on that? Everybody get the QR code if they wanted it? And if not, you can go back to our webpage and click that green button. It'll take you right to this page. So more than one way to get there. And finally, I'll take any other questions in the last 5 minutes we have this evening.
I have just one question. So when you talk about incentives and stuff for the state to look at, I see the participation by the AEAs, but I also wonder if there are any incentives to say, we want to keep this at the student level, not instructing adults as to how to support our learners, but that true model of working with families and students and staying at the student-centered level.
Yeah, well, the majority of the cohort, remember there are 20 members and only 9 of those members are from the AEA. I realize that's almost half, but it's not quite half. More people are directly in schools right now. And I think moving forward that there won't be all 9 AEAs in every single cohort. I think we will take more and more teachers. We have to have more and more teachers apply. The only reasons that we didn't accept people the last time are the reasons that I gave you. Applications were incomplete. People were ineligible because they really did not have 3 years of certified teaching experience. And the other group we didn't accept were instructors at institutes of higher ed who just wanted to learn how to offer the program themselves. So we very much focused on getting boots on the ground and teachers in front of kids. We lost the 2 other people that we did accept who are not currently in the cohort were both teachers. So that would have pushed the numbers of teachers relative to AEA people even higher. But I am hopeful that we continue to get high numbers of teachers because I'm with you. I think we need more people in front of kids every day who have this knowledge and the capacity to help them. I think funding's the tough part. The AEA consultants had funding. Teachers did not.
I have another question if nobody else does. I don't want to monopolize, but so I have hosted multiple reading practicum students through Upper Iowa, and each time they're like at a junior or senior, and when they watch the science of reading, they just are dumbfounded on the first day, and they're like, I did not learn any of this, and they're kind of feeling almost discouraged that they're that far into their teacher program. So I just wondered if there are any plans to, the overview model is wonderful, but I just wonder if there are any plans to get a more comprehensive understanding of the science of reading very early on in the teacher prep programs. What kind of steps are happening with that across the state, regardless of a private or public institution?
This is where the reading wars are still alive and well. I would say that teacher prep programs are solid breeding ground for the reading wars, unfortunately. I wish I had an answer to that. Unfortunately, I do not. As I said, we had at least anticipated that the dyslexia specialist endorsement would influence the reading endorsement, but that's not happening. And I don't see a lot of changes occurring in undergraduate teacher prep. I wish I could change it. I am powerless to do so.
Thank you.
Unfortunately.
Dr. Reed, I know you mentioned that the state of Iowa does not currently offer any grants, any scholarships. So this question is actually more for the people in the group. Anyone have a rich uncle that they'd like to, send my way? I live in Pleasant Hill, real close to Des Moines. Anyway, no, on a serious note though, does anyone have any ideas on how to pursue places that would provide funding? Like when I got my master's degree, I got a grant from PEO, a sorority kind of type place, but I don't currently belong to that anymore. So I'm just trying to brainstorm. That's the barrier that's between my dream and my husband's desires. And I respect his opinion as well. I'm not fighting with him about it. It's just, I really, really want it.
Yeah, and this question also came in the chat about, can you write grants for the funding? I don't know of current sources, and I'd welcome anyone else on with us this evening to offer them. I can tell you that at least 2 students in the cohort completed typical financial aid paperwork because I have to help them with that part, and took on additional student loan debt, I believe, in order to participate in this cohort. So that's always a possibility. It's like financing this next degree, I guess, but it's unfortunate. As I said, there is state funding available for school psychologists. So it seems like there should be a way to make funding available to teachers, but it's just not currently in place. So I don't know if anyone else knows of it. I'm also scrolling through the chat to see if somebody said GoFundMe. Oh, Amy said that. What is the cost right now?
I had a coworker suggest a GoFundMe page today when I was talking to her about it. She's like, there's enough people here that believe in what you're doing. Maybe we could start a GoFundMe page. I'll keep you posted.
There you go. The cost straight out, I think was Sarah's question. That is up on our FAQ. And I think, I don't set tuition, so don't kill the messenger here, but I believe it's $14,000 for the entire endorsement. So Michelle's comment of you'd have to work until your last breath to recoup the cost, I can completely appreciate that. It's a very expensive endorsement. There's no two ways about it. There needs to be some financial support for it. Yeah. I think Jen's point is well taken. That maybe districts will start to sponsor teachers in some way. They could dedicate professional development funds to it. I think there's been support in the past for getting people certified in special education when there have been shortages. So potentially. Oh, and Jen even said they sponsored them to get a computer science endorsement. So could be. But yeah, Liz's point about raising community awareness, I think, is a good avenue for getting additional people to pay attention to it and potentially fund it. So, and other things are coming in, like from Siouxland Foundation for grants, et cetera. So I don't know, Amy, if your organization has any way to kind of keep track of some of those opportunities. But
We can definitely start just kind of a resource dump for anything that people have been having success with.
I'm scrolling through to see if I missed anything. Michelle asked how we can help to change the undergraduate programs. The only thing that I tell people is you're all clients, you're customers of the Institutes of Higher Education. And if clients aren't happy, then the provider would have to change. So I think it's going to take a groundswell of people. When we do evaluations after a session, there's always a complainer in the bunch. It was too cold in the room. The lunch was terrible. She talked too much on this webinar. So there's always going to be a complainer in the bunch. And when we get the evaluations, we go, there's the complainer, right? And we throw it out. So if only one person goes back to their Institute of Higher Education and says, you didn't prepare me for the science of reading. I was completely unequipped to deal with what I confronted in the classroom and to help my kids. Well, you're one person, and they'll say something like, well, that's because you went to that school, or, or maybe you didn't pay attention that day or something. But if it's a groundswell of people who go back and say, seriously, you're not preparing us, I think it becomes harder to ignore and less likely that you get written off as the one complainer who thought it was too cold in the room. So that's the only thing I can say is it takes a lot of people working together, like your group. And there are some other suggestions coming in about publishing fast scores and
Start selling some cookies, Anita.
I just made cookies last night for the cookie exchange at school tomorrow. So get going, right?
Yeah.
3 years ago, I took a class from True Potential Education 3 summers ago, and they're a private tutoring company in Des Moines, and they had 40 hours of instruction about dyslexia. And I live an hour away. I live in Guthrie Center, and I drove with my neighbor, who's the special ed teacher, and both of us, we just talked for an hour on the way there and on the way home. And I was so angry the first 2 days because I'm like, I spent how many thousands of dollars? I have a reading endorsement. She has a special ed endorsement. There was so many things that we learned that week that it just blew my mind. And like, we would talk for hours, and I still do refer back to that because I was like, I am just ready to call you and I and tell them a piece of my mind. I want a refund, but I didn't.
Well, you and 50 of your friends need to
Right.
get together and do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know it's frustrating. I was in the same boat with you. So I originally did my teacher certification in California in the height of whole language. So you know exactly how I was prepared. And then I taught in juvenile justice facilities and in very high needs communities in the middle of the desert in California, and thought, Well, that stuff would be a ducky little plan if the kids already knew how to read, but because they don't, that's not helpful here. I need to know how to start from square one. So I was in the same boat as all of you and having to do my own professional development and learning to try and figure out how to meet the needs of my kids. And it's frustrating. It really is. And I can't believe I've been in education for 30 years and we're having the same conversation. Do I think someone would ever be able to audit any of the cohort classes? At some point in the future, it may be possible. Unfortunately, I think the University of Iowa charges you even for auditing. They don't charge you as much, but I don't think they even let you audit for free. I don't set these rules. So again, please don't shoot the messenger here, but the regents set the tuition rates and the University of Iowa has its little procedures. And I'm sure, I just can tell you because I'm there, but I'm sure the other institutions are the same. I mean, you and I, Iowa State are all Regents institutions as well. So we're all subject to similar policies.
Northwest AEA is currently offering a course on the science of reading. It is 3 different afternoons from 1 till 3. And then they will also offer it, I want to say it's in January, and that is from 4 until 6. So as an instructional coach, I've encouraged several of our teachers to take that, and just so that they can be made more aware. You know, even though they maybe didn't get it in college, as most of us didn't, we can still continue to learn and take advantage of those opportunities. Plus, that is a free course. So, yeah, it's not for credit. It's just 3 2-hour sessions. So it's something you might want to look into.
That's very helpful. And I will say that in my time, this is my 7th year in Iowa, and the dramatic change that I have seen in the AEAs in the 7 years that I have been here is one of the most optimistic things that if there's hope, that's all I can say is that I would say that the majority of the AEAs when I first got here were skeptical of me and skeptical of science of reading. And I just don't see that at any AEA anymore. So I'm very encouraged by that, and surely schools will follow if that's the case. Liz, I'm really excited. Somebody is asking you, where are you located? I'd like to know too. So that's great.
Honestly, I think when I think about funding and everything, I have opened my doors. I will, even unannounced, I don't care. I'm so passionate about this. I taught 30 years ago with open court, which is the same thing. Didn't know a thing when I got out of college, did that. And then fast forward, you know, being 8 years in, our results have been so phenomenal that we have opened the doors to schools 5 times our size, and they've come to observe. It doesn't matter to me the size, but when we have grandparents come in and watch, they are dumbfounded. And to me, you get somebody that has some funding and they're so dumbfounded by what they're watching that kindergartners can say to them, well, I use the CK option when it follows a short vowel and at the end of the word. And they look at you and they're like, okay, show me a list of words because I'm not quite sure. But they're like, oh my word. So to me, that's where the eye-opening and the aha moments for anybody that has funding. Get going, even if you, because I taught myself at first, get going and invite people in, because it's hard to deny once they see it in real time with little bitty kids that are incredibly knowledgeable. It's just mind-blowing.
That's awesome, Liz. Great. Well, Amy, we're over your time.
Oh man, I didn't even pay attention. I'm just so intrigued by all of this. It's such good info. I'm in the cohort and I learned so much. It was great. Thank you so much, Dr. Reed. This was so informative, and I know everyone in the room is so passionate and doing what they can every minute that they're with kids, and like we said, being self-taught until we can get some funding or some resources. And luckily there is a lot of the just the professional researchers and practitioners are out there volunteering their time to help us all learn for free as well. Just to put a plug in for January 25th, our next meeting, we will host Wiley Blevins, and he's going to talk about characteristics of strong phonics instruction. So invite your friends. Yeah. And thank you so much. You can reach out to me or Dr. Reed, I'm sure, if there are extra or different questions that weren't answered tonight. And have a great rest of your week and winter break. Thanks for coming.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you.